It's 2022, and this is still the water in more than 100 native reservations across Canada.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Cole. This is the Cole Kim's Environmental Ethic podcast. What do you think about the video clip? Just what you saw. As soon as I saw this video clip, I thought it was one of kind of prank video or joke. Some guy prepared black water or Coca-Cola underneath a faucet and a link to the sink and released the black water for making a fun video. But actually, it is not a joke at all. It is actually contaminated water of indigenous people in their reserve and in their house. They don't have access for safe water for drinking. Yeah, today's topic is water crisis of indigenous people. Especially we'll focus on the case of Crescent Arrow First Nations Reserve, which is the victims of mercury poisoning in the long period. In 2015, the Canadian government committed to end all of the long-term drinking water advisory in these indigenous communities by March 2021. But according to Globe and Mail, since 2004, the inaccessibility of water in indigenous people is ongoing issue. Even today, there are no long-term drinking water advisory in the place of the First Nations, with the government pushing back its deadline to end water advisory to 2026. In particular, likewise what I said, we will focus on the Crescent Arrow mercury poisoning case, which has happened by Dryden Chemical, which is a paper company. This Anishinaabe community in northern Western Ontario is the really important example of the environmental injustice, which is ongoing and one of the longest example of water crisis in Canada. So Crescent Arrow has about the population of 1490 people, and it is near the English Wabigon River systems, which Dryden Company dumped their mercury. So this community has registered against corporations, Dryden Chemical, as well the provincial and federal government for proper solutions. The discovery of the mercury poisoning in the 1970 was a devastating blow to the Crescent Arrow. The fish, their traditional main source of the food, contained extremely high levels of mercury poisoning, toxic dumping by Dryden Chemical pulp and Paypal mill upstream. The mill leaked about 9,000 kilograms of mercury into the English Wabigon river system between the 1962 and the 1975. Since 1970 to today, the high levels of contaminations forced the community to stop commercial fishing and tourist fishing as one of the last avenue for traditional economic living of the indigenous people. So massive unemployment occurred in the First Nations reserve too. As well, the mercury moves up the food chain from bacteria, small fish, big fish, and indigenous people. The level of mercury is higher at the top of the ecosystem, which is the indigenous people. The worst thing is mercury poisoning. Mercury poisoning has multi-generational health issues, such as newborn baby with cancer and brain damage of fellow generation. Thus, the people of the Grayson Arrows are facing uh, the total devastation of their lives economically, culturally, traditionally, and bodily. The case of the mercury poisoning in the Grass Narrows cannot simply be understood as an incident of the pollutions without looking at the historically created colonial patterns. The colonization of the Canadian government had appropriations of indigenous land for commercial gains and establishes some understanding of the border colonial context within which Grass Narrow fits today. In Grass Narrows, Anishinaabe relations with the colonizers begin in 1873 when community members started working with the Hudson Bay Company in the company. And in the 1920s, the government sought to monopolize traditional Anishinaabe land by encroaching uh, the way of life of indigenous people through the modernizations, including the implementation of residential schools. In the 50s, 1950s, Ontario Hydro built dams that flooded the wild rice harvesting sites of indigenous people that destroyed natural habitats for many fishes and animals. So indigenous people often face that, also like don't have much access to their traditional food source by the Ontario Hydro. In the 1960s, the residents of the Grass Narrow relocated themselves to new reserve to prevent continued child apprehensions. But the new space was not consistent with their cultural lifestyle. So the government agencies attempts relocate indigenous people by the vision of the modernizations came with racisms, discriminations, loss of land and the culture, and traditional Anishinaabe spiritual practices being outlawed. The government pressured the Anishinaabe community to limit their freedom to use their infusion sentence lands. Since royal proclamations in 1763 was proclaimed, the colonizing control and assimilations marginalized the indigenous people, albeit it was initially named like protecting Indian territory, but it was for the exploitation of their land as resource, such as the trade of fur in the Indian territory. Especially 1940s, the Ontario government significantly intensified its effort to control Grass Narrows land and resources. The provincial government increasingly controlled indigenous communities' fishing efforts through the policy of conservation and management. By doing so, the government undermined the community's remaining socio-economic avenue, which including gardening, hunting, and medicine gathering and fishing. Soon after Commercial fishing remained one of few economic practices of indigenous people as complementary to the Anishinaabe traditional way of life. But in the between the 1962 to 1970, Dryden Paper and Chemical Company dumped 9,000 kilograms of mercury into English Wabigoon River systems. So the commercial fishing was banned. In the 1970, when the mercury poisoning in English Wabigoon River was reported, the government of Canada only brought basic compensations. The resident in Grayson Arrow as the Band-Aid solutions. And the Ontario government insisted, actually, that poisonous fish were safe to eat, while the community increasingly showed the signs of the mercury poisoning. So this issue is ongoing even today. By the budget issue with the budget for profound health and solutions too. CBC News says, which is released June 2023 this year, the building of mercury care centers is delayed due to increased cost of the constructions, and its starting days is no one know actually. So Ruddy Tuttle, who is the chief of the Grayson Arrow First Nation, says a few years ago when Trudeau was out campaigning, he said on national television that money wouldn't be an issue building the treatment centers. Now, it is kind of like they are backing down on their word. So both federal and Ontario government promised First Nations people for profound solutions as nation-to-nation relationship. But again, the Indigenous people faced broken promise. Thus, the long legacy of colonialisms, just what we saw, the Grayson Arrow was identified the marginalized place that nobody cares. Even, some people dump the mercury like hazardous waste on that reserve. So in people's mind, the marginalized place is just a place for nobody caring in that patterns. And we can ask then why does Canadian government fail to meet the promise? What is their approach on solutions? According to Stefano Vix, the approach of the Canadian government is utilitarianism on the water issue. Utilitarianism means the doctrine that actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of the majority. Utilitarianism has the principle of what most people would be happy to most of the time. The use of cost-benefit analysis and money value metric can seem rational and non-biased, but it is actually preferable in the light of the difficulty faced when dealing with the issue of socially marginalized people against the majority of the society. Then we can ask questions. Happy are those who? What happens in a case of the unequal distribution in utilitarian calculus, where a small number of the people suffer while many benefits? Is it neutral and non-biased for equal distribution of the common good? Can we say that the pleasure of the many over small sufferings mean to have a justified solutions? My answer is no. In other words, happy are those who has power and outnumber than the indigenous people. The high cost of the repairing the water infrastructure have risk that it can be forced to stop by dominant group of the people in society, which is non-indigenous people, with the principle of the maximum happiness of the most people. So utilitarian approach on the water issue of the indigenous reserve has this clear limit as anthropocentric approach containing colonial attitude. With this approach, water is identified as source or resource for humans. The place of the indigenous people also identified as a resource for the dumping waste for keep cleaning non-indigenous people's place. So with this approach, the profound touching on the problem is not possible to bring the life or the actual challenge of the marginalized people. Rather, its sole focus on the value of money is not free from the settlers as dominant group of Canada. Thus, utilitarian approach on the water crisis of Grassy Narrow does not have a parameter of the systemic violence by both industry and the government throughout history. Just because utilitarianism does not begin with the actual experience of the indigenous people. Water crisis of the Grassy Narrow as the environmental racism is the result of colonialism that made indigenous people live in the marginalized people that where people might think it is like it is okay to dump hazardous waste there. However, utilitarianism as the approach of the government does not have the capacity to dismantle a long legacy of the colonialism. Rather, it is already being a tool of colonialism and the settlers' development. Then we need decolonizing ethics. Our epistemology is supposed to be different from the settlers. If we really cling to settlers' understanding to deal with both the environment and the water crisis of the people, it will just bring temporary solution. The settlers' vision to assess the problem of the colonial legacy has a risk to not solving the issue due to the vision of or the principle of the utilitarianism. So this is reason why we need to see the experience of indigenous people about environment as their home and our home too. I suggest Nibi. Nibi means water in Anishinaabe that has a spirit, an agent to connect everything. Water as spiritual agent is being the lifeblood of everything, including people. For example, the Ninatig maple tree has sweet water. After long, harsh winter, at the spring, the sweet water gives itself people to survive. Through water, all people can survive. So Nibi is not identified as just a resource, what settlers think of. Rather, Nibi gives us the gift of life. And Nibi tells us we need it to live. Nibi tells us we are not able to live without Nibi. And in the light of Nibi's teachings, we are too responsible to care the water and environment. Thus, we need to be taught by water. And our belief about human superiority above all living beings, including other people, should be taught by water. As we human, we are not steward, but water is steward. In this very moment, while I'm doing this podcast, I decided to take the teaching of the Nibi as the changing one of Christians' ritual as a starting point of our practice.
So far, Christianity has baptisms as a core sacrament. It has been referring to the salvations of soul in the display of the baptism of Jesus Christ. So in that thinkings, Christianity always pointed out to the otherworldly goal, going to the heaven. So this word has been to us just a temporal place where we go, where we stay before we go into the heaven. In that reasons we cannot take care our word and even ourselves, even our friend in the indigenous reserve. But in the light of indigenous water word Nibi that has spirit, it gives the life to all and it connects to all totally different from us. In the 21st century, Christianity is no longer the settlers' religions. But then we should take the teachings of Nibi, the water. With the water, we can live. With the water, we are living beings. Remember this gift of life, then we are a friend of environment and our friends too.
So this is the end of the podcast. I hope you can bring the teaching of the Nibi in your life. And we together, I hope we can practice the teaching of the Nibi in our lives. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.